so welcome to today's session. We're here to talk a little bit about podcasts today. Again, my name is Kawande Hall. I'm the manager of the social media training program over at DINFOS. With me on set today is Sterling McKinley, who's also part of my office, and our special guest today is Mr. Tanner Iskra. And again, we're going to jump right into podcasts. So, Tanner, tell us a little bit about yourself and how'd you get here?
I'm a 11 and a half year Marine Corps veteran. You and I served together. Did that, got out in 2015, then became a senior post-production editor for NASCAR Productions. And now I work for the VA as their podcast host for Born the Battle.
Awesome. So how did you find yourself in the podcast world, I guess?
So I was hired on as a video producer because that was my background and, cutting stories and everything, DINFOS graduate. And our podcast host left, Tim Lawson, and they didn't know what to do with the podcast. And I was just raising my hand. I said, I'll take it. And I got a phone call. Like, do you want this? And I was like, absolutely, because I saw so many applications that what we could do with the podcast moving forward. So just kind of fell right into it from being a video producer.
Okay, we get a lot of questions in the office regarding podcasts, how to start a podcast, what is that planning process, how do I convince my commander to start a podcast? I mean,
Sure.
Where do we start?
It really comes down to the same principle that you would for any other kind of medium, right? So it's like, who is your audience? What is the commander? Who does the commander want to reach? Who does the CEO want to reach? And how do you want to reach them? If it's a podcast, that's great. And if you have a strategic content marketing plan to go with the podcast, to include video, to include social, to include newsletters, if you're able to show them how you're going to get that message to that audience, then it's a shoo-in. Whether it's a podcast, a documentary, a video, a feature, whatever it is, same principle applies.
Yeah, I love what you just said, and I think now in this age, everybody has a podcast now because it's so popular. Everybody's getting a podcast. Some are good, some are bad.
It's oversaturated, absolutely.
But I guess, like you said, the value in it. So what goes into making sure your podcast stands out, that it's different? And like you said, at the end of the day, it's getting across the message that you want to relay.
Well, yeah, to your point, like you said, the day of if you build it, they will come in the podcasting realm is over.
Yeah.
Joe Rogan got in it early. That's why he's Joe Rogan. Drinking Bros, very popular veteran podcast, came out in 2014. That was 7 years ago. A lot of those guys left. They moved on to other podcasts. So, it's the day of you will build it, they will come are over. Right. So now you have to differentiate, like you said, differentiate. How are you going to get your podcast to the audience that you're intended to follow? You're not just going to build it and post it and people are going to come. It just ain't going to happen anymore.
Right.
So you have to have a strategic marketing plan behind your podcast before you can even think about starting one. What's the intent? What are we going to talk about? What's the mission statement? What are the tenets that are going to formulate that mission statement, that are going to hold that mission statement up? All those things come into play before you even think about starting a podcast.
Right. And that's one follow-up question. We're in a stage now where technology is a lot more affordable than it was years ago. So for somebody trying to get started, what's the kind of a good, better, and best kind of setup? Can you give us kind of a range of kind of what that should entail?
Yeah. I mean, I started recording Born the Battle in my in-laws' basement. You know what I mean? Okay. Like you saw that first rig. It was like, I had a desk that was like,
right.
It was at a long screen and a $50 mic and a Zoom H6 recorder.
Right.
And record it, and with the right peripherals, you can get call-in guests. You can, if you're doing a type of podcast where you're just talking directly to the audience member, you can do it right there.
Right.
Hit it, record, put it on the SD card, and then cut it in Audition or GarageBand. You can do GarageBand, Audacity. Audacity's free. Right. And then as I was able to show the value of the podcast, then we leveled up. Then I got a Rodecaster Pro. Then we got a different mic with a boom because when I was recording, that rickety desk was it was on a little cheap $5 stand. You can kind of hear that, so I had to be very careful. Soundproof. So you can start. The entry to podcasting is very very small, and so you can still make it sound so professional.
Right.
And you just go up from there.
Okay.
Now let's talk a little bit about going back to Born to Battle. It's a great podcast. It's geared directly for veterans.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us about how first you guys identified your audience? What was that process? And then how does then your content geared towards, that specific audience?
Sure. Well, it's pretty easy with the Department of Veterans Affairs, right? It's veterans, and there are 13 million veterans, right? So, but there's also splits in that demographic, 18 to 49, 49 and older. Our Facebook, so a lot of the content that is based around marketing the podcast is dependent on the audience on each platform. So Facebook is kind of an older demographic. So we talk about, if I have a clip about historical parts of a person's story as a battle or something like that, I'll put that on Facebook. Some of the younger stuff that people talk about, I'll put on Instagram when it talks about business, entrepreneurship, that sort of thing. Twitter is kind of like a little bit of mix of both, really. So really, the marketing of the demographics of the platform that you're marketing to get people to your audience, because you're trying to convert direct email marketing. Color, all that matters depending on the platform that you're using to market the audience to. So how do you identify the audience? The audience for us was easy, with veterans, and then we segment it based on the platform that we're marketing on, based on the audience that we already have built in.
Okay. And you talk a little bit about, like I noticed you just talked about like email marketing and things like that. And a lot of times when we think about social media, we kind of get focused on one thing. Can you tell us about how like your overall communication strategy just kind of encompasses a certain platform?
Absolutely. So we just crossed 1 million downloads for the podcast after about 4 years. And it was kind of pod faded by the time I took over as host. We were getting about 2,000 downloads a month, something like that. There were days that we weren't getting any downloads. So that was one post on social media. We weren't doing anything with, there weren't any blogs associated with it. So there was no featured image. It was just a post. And that's kind of all it was. So, I've created smart links so there's links. So on social media now, if you click on that link, depending on the device that you're clicking from, it will direct you to the best platform available. So if it's on Android, it's going to go to Spotify or Google Podcasts. If it's on Apple or iOS, it's going to take you to Apple Podcasts. So that was one thing. Having associated content to go with your podcast, like we blog every episode. We blog about every episode. The show notes turn into a blog on blog.va.gov, and you can see them there. We make it a multimedia thing. There's YouTube that goes and talks about the subject matter or the guest. If it's Billy Mills and he got the gold medal in the 64 games, we're going to embed the NBC clip where he won the gold medal in the blog. So and then we're also going to embed the player, right? So you're also going to get the conversion of the player. And then we post that on social media. So the blog is the basis for every part of your social content strategy. We're now getting into YouTube, but all those are built to get you to the podcast, whether you want to play it on YouTube or whether you want to play it on any one of the podcast player apps. But I don't know if that answered your question. I don't know where we went with that. No. It's all that plays into each other. You can't just have, like I said, it just goes back to, you can't just make a podcast, put on a player, and expect for people to come. You have to build the road to get them there.
Right. Yeah, we get a lot of questions that come in. People just want to start a podcast. Or they say, hey, you know what? I've got this great idea. We're going to start a podcast. And then, can you tell us a little bit, like, what is the background? Like, how much content do you need in advance? What does your planning process look like? I'm
probably about 3 or 4 episodes ahead in the can. But when you really want to start, you really want to have, it depends. It really depends. So if you're going to there's 2 types of podcasts, episodic, which you're going to produce on a battle rhythm every 2 weeks or every week at least. Or you're going to do a serial podcast where it's going to be like a Netflix drop where you drop it like a season. It all depends on what your bandwidth is, right? So if you're a public affairs and you're dedicated to podcasting, I would say, hey, try to make a serial one. If you are, like we have VA researchers that do podcasts. We have VA nutritionists. Public affairs is not their primary mode of communication. They will do a serial. They will do a season. They will build all the content marketing. They will build the podcasts, they will build everything, and then they'll drop it like Netflix and then do the content marketing strategy on the back end. I do episodic. So, Monday is my basically my cut down day from the interview that I do on a Thursday or Friday. Tuesday is my record and write and record the monologues that I do on each end. And this is different for every podcast. Every podcast is built different. You can have a different cookie cutter. Wednesday is my cut down day because I screw up a lot in the monologues and I cut down the monologues. Thursday is my admin day where I'm booking guests and I'm looking at, I have interns that do the blogs now. I have interns that do the social media content. Could be your Lance Corporals, could be your Young Marines, could be fellow journalists, whoever. I'm just a one-man band with a couple of interns. So I look at all the content that I review, and on Friday I schedule everything, and then it turns back around. And so it's a week. I mean, I'm 40 hours into it by that point for one episode. Not counting, I'm not doing the social media. I'm not doing the video previews anymore. I'm cutting them out on Mondays, but I'm not the one doing all the social media writing and scheduling. I schedule on Fridays, but yeah, it's a 40-hour commitment for one episode, 40 hour plus. So I would say if you want to start, you also need about 10 in the bag. If you're going to do an episodic, post 5, because you don't know how many people it takes to subscribe to your podcast. Maybe they want to listen to more than one. Plus, when you post in the beginning at your first thing, if you have a lot of downloads in your first week or so, you're going to get that new and noteworthy section in Apple Podcasts. Now you're off to the races because now Apple Podcasts is recommending your podcast. So you really want to have about a good 5-10 in the bag and then 5-10 in the can, because you don't know if you're a guest podcast, you don't know if a guest is going to cancel, if anything like that. So you got some in the can. You're working ahead of the game. But you don't just want to go, okay, I got one. Okay, maybe in 3 weeks I'll post another one. Maybe in 2 weeks I'll post another. You got to have a certain battle rhythm. You got to build up an expectation of consistency for your audience. It's imperative.
You mentioned earlier, per platform, you know the audience, so you kind of know what to post. So are you doing any kind of research, looking at analytics, say, hey, these topics are trending? I know you can go into Google or go into YouTube and you can see trending topics. Yeah. How do you pick the topics for
what veterans are searching for? We have a company. They do Google searches. They show us what top searches are for veterans. Mm-hmm. So every 5 episodes I do what's called a benefits breakdown. I do on the 5s and 0s. I go internal. That's kind of it's kind of paying back to the VA since they're like the big sponsor, right? Mm-hmm. So I go to a benefit or a program or an office and I shake them. I go, all right, what do you do? How do you help veterans? And how are they? How can they be eligible for your services? And it could be GI Bill, it could be home loan, it could be IRL. But yeah, to your point, we do some digging into not only what people are searching for, but where's the audience coming from? There's great analytics in podcasting that a lot of the players, a lot of the directories, libraries or directories, I think it's directories, like Transistor or Libsyn, they'll tell you what state people are listening from. So you can get all right, cool. A lot of people, like 20% of my audience is from Texas. My next guest will be from Texas.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. At Schoolhouse, we're always talking about the importance of analytics, because I feel now we're in this age where we're still guessing, but there's so much data out there. I feel like if you look at that data, it gives you a better, direction of where to go with your content. So that's great that you do that.
You're still guessing though.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's still a guessing game.
Exactly.
Right. So.
Yeah. That's one thing too. Everybody wants to go viral in a sense, and there's no really formula to go viral. You do your best, and then one day you get lucky, and then you get that.
You have to really understand the algorithms too with each platform to go viral and understand your audience. You don't just go viral. You have to build the opportunity to go viral. So, absolutely.
So what numbers do you kind of focus on when you're looking at when you're analyzing your data or evaluating, was this successful, was this not successful?
We do look at more of a mass communication type of model since we're trying to appeal to so many veterans, right? 13 million, 14 million, however many are out there. So I look at monthly downloads, that's one. And then I look at downloads within the first 30 days of an episode dropping. So they'll give you that feedback, and that kind of, they've done, Libsyn's done, there's blogs written about, they say if you are averaging 1,100 downloads in your first 30 days, you're doing better than 20%. You're doing better than 80% of the podcasts out there in the top 20%. If you average 3,300, you're in the top 10%. So we're there. We're roughly in the 10%, 12% range. So I can go back to my boss and go, all right, you want to reach this many people. We're one of the top 20, we're the one in the top 10% of all podcasts in podcasting. Okay, let's keep rolling, right? So, plus we look at the podcast charts. So Chartable, chartable.com is a great resource. Tells you where you're at in Apple iTunes or Apple Podcasts as far as the charts for your category. So we've hit number 1 in the government category. So I'm able to go back to my boss and say, hey, look, we're the number 1 government podcast on Apple Podcasts for this week. Okay, cool, bullseye, done. But then, like we've talked about this before, audience size isn't everything. If it's major stakeholders that listen to your podcast and you can prove that, like if I have the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and Congress and every one of the big 6 veteran agencies, the president of Vietnam Veterans of America, AMVETS, VFW. If the major players in those organizations and Congress and the SecVA are making judgments based on hearing the veterans on my podcast, I would count that as a success as well. And if I can prove that, and I have been able to say, hey, this congressman has been able to listen, because they like whatever's on social, I can immediately point to a stakeholder and go, that person listened to my podcast. So it's not all numbers.
That's good. That's good. I had a question in it. Fleeted my mind just like that.
Let me think of one. So when I hear podcasting, I think storytelling.
Yeah.
And, no matter what decade we're in, what technology it is, it's all about telling a story, whether it's movie or TVs or books, and now podcasting. So talk about some of the elements of storytelling you use to make podcasts, more and more engaging and more relatable.
I look at Born the Battle as like it's a biographical podcast of a person that I'm interviewing.
Okay. That
my audience can pull from and go, if they can do it, I can do it too. So and that's kind of the podcast that I gravitate towards. I don't watch professional wrestling anymore, but I still am enamored with the business of professional wrestling. So I listen. There are a lot of my inspirations. 83 Weeks and Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard. They do the same thing that Born the Battle does a lot of times, is they'll analyze a pay-per-view or a person's life, like Jake the Snake Robert, and just go through and find things that people can pick out of and utilize in their own life. And so I thought that was a great formula. And so I kind of emulated it with Born the Battle, and it seems to be doing pretty well so far.
On that topic, who's your favorite wrestler?
Oh, man. It's got to be The Rock, man.
The Rock, yeah.
People's elbow, eyebrow, the charisma.
Right, exactly.
Everything about The Rock, man. And Stone Cold's there too, but man, It's got to be The Rock. 100%.
Yeah. I've done. I watch a lot of podcasts, and there's so much podcasts around wrestling now, and it's great hearing those backstories. So kind of behind the scenes, behind the curtains, like people want that view, kind of behind the scenes.
Yes.
They didn't live their life, but they like to hear about, hey, this is what that person went through.
Yeah, like I was at WrestleMania 19 in high school, right?
Okay.
And to hear that Stone Cold was in the hospital the night before, I saw him like tear the house down and almost died from drinking too many energy drinks.
Right.
Everybody wants to hear the behind the scenes.
Right.
And those guys live like rock stars. They make 80s hair metal bands like look like kindergarten. You know what I mean? So like that's the whole reason. So that's how I got into podcasting. Mm-hmm. And that was my first podcast I listened to. And then I listened to Drinking Bros.
Right.
And I heard, great interaction on Drinking Bros, but I wasn't hearing things from a veteran perspective that I wanted to learn to improve my life.
Right.
Great stuff, great content, but I wanted more from it. So I always wanted to do a veteran podcast that focused on that. And then when I found that the VA had it, I was like, this is great, I want to do it.
Right. Do you ever hear any feedback directly from your audience, whether that's through social media or emails? Hey, this helped me a lot.
Yep.
Talk about some of that.
I do. I always say I kind of do a Born the Battle Veteran of the Week where I talk about a veteran's life at the very end, and it's more like, hey, this week's Veteran of the Week is X, nominated by so and so, as they wrote into podcast@va.gov.
Okay.
So it creates that audience interaction, and they will nominate people through the email. I also read off in the beginning every single review that I get.
Oh wow.
Now I don't, if I get 10 reviews in it hasn't happened yet, but if it has 10 reviews, I might just pick one. Okay. But what it will do is it fosters a relationship that I am listening to you, I am hearing you, and I will respond to you.
So even the bad reviews, you read those?
Oh yeah, I got a 1-star one time.
Okay.
And it had something to do with.
It could have been a bot. It could have been trying to. So.
No, I don't think it was a bot. No. It was someone that a VA service did not work for him, and I did my best to respond. I actually went to that VA office. I got this review. Help me out here with a response. Okay. Got the response and was able to articulate. I thought was I don't think he actually heard the podcast, but so. No, yeah, I do even read the 1-star reviews because I think it's important to understand that. Say, hey, no matter what, I'm listening.
All right, one more question then. In fact, Mr. Hall. But you talk about, I think the big thing, social media now, and that me and Mr. Hall always telling in our classes is, in this social and digital age, it's about that communication.
Trust.
That back and forth.
So that trust.
Yeah, you mentioned hearing from your audience and bringing the reviews, and that's so key because we always hear about people that ignore reviews, ignore the comments that are bad and the ones that are good. And even now in corporate America, I go to so many accounts that have millions of fans and followers, and there are tons of comments that are not responded to. So talk about that engagement and how that engagement really builds that community and that repeat listener.
You know, with the VA, number one, stay in your lane. Okay. You know what I mean? There's a lot of things, there's a lot of comments that I really should not be responding to because I'm not the subject matter expert. Can I get a subject matter expert to respond to? I would love to have that if we had a VA support hashtag at VA support that could respond. Wink, wink, hint, hint. Hope you're listening. The service recovery is important though, because if you can talk about it, then talk to them, respond to them, have that, and have that leader, make sure that you have that trust with that leadership, so you can respond with that sort of latitude. So, but the most important thing is stay in your lane. I could talk to you about the podcast all day long. I talked about social media, video production, that sort of thing. When you're talking about your specific issue with a VA home loan or your disability, bro, you're talking to the wrong person. I can refer you to the right people and to the right email accounts and to the right phone numbers. But I am not going to be the one that's going to give you subject matter expert advice because I'm not that guy.
Right.
As much as I would like to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does, because what I hear in that conversation, and drives me back to what I was thinking, is niche, right? And finding out, as you guys were talking about like wrestling, so there's wrestling podcasts. If people aren't interested in wrestling, then it's okay if they're not listening to your podcast. Same thing with veterans. You know, you guys have kind of honed in on who your audience is and who you're talking to. And I think a lot of times in the military, or across the DOD, a lot of times, not just with podcasts, but in social in general, we kind of forget who we are and where our lanes are, left and right, lateral limits are. So I'm kind of glad you brought that up.
It's so important because it can get you in a lot of trouble, as we saw with the Marine Corps recently. So.
Right. Yeah. So another question I have is, so once you have your audience's attention, okay, people have figured out that, all right, you've got a podcast out there, be it, Born to Battle or, if it's, 2nd Marine Division or whomever. Podcast is there, How do we now get those people to kind of not only listen to us that one time, but kind of stick around, if that makes sense? Gotcha.
Well, it's the consistency that I was telling you about in the strategic marketing plan. Keep reminding them that it's there. If they're, get them to subscribe. So you eventually want that final conversion of them subscribing to your podcast and getting that notification in their phone, or on YouTube. So how do you do that? Social media is a part of it. Social media posts are a part of it to get in that conversation on social media, but they have very, very low conversion rates. I'll tell you right now. How often are you on Facebook or Instagram and have you actually clicked on a link? For me, it's very few.
Right.
Where do you click the most? I click most in email.
Right.
So if you're in an email distribution list to 11 million veterans, probably a good place to be. Getting back into direct email marketing to veterans through we have VA News. So important in conversions, right? So when am I talking about conversions? I'm talking about the reverse marketing pyramid. So if you have your reach, you have, let's say link clicks, and you have subs, okay? It dwindles with each what I call conversion. So if you're able to figure out say I can get this many clicks with this if I reach this many people based on the current strategy that I have, and this many subs, maybe it's 1 to 100. And then 1 to 1,000. So if you know those ratios, you could then go, okay, cool. Based on the current marketing strategy that I have, if I amplify it to say if I reach this many people, in theory, I can get this many link clicks and this many subs. And then how do you change that? How can you increase that conversion rate or those ratios? Could be a color, could be a title on an email. Could be an image change. It could be a guest. And you're guessing the whole time. But what you can do is once you have, say, 3 to 6 months of data based on your current strategy, then you can start tinkering.
With that email marketing, how often are you sending out emails to your
Every
subscribers?
week. Every week we're in the VA newsletter, Vet Resources newsletter.
Right.
And I fight for scroll space because I'm usually at the bottom of that newsletter.
Right.
It's always like what's in it for me type of stuff for veterans,
right.
Resources and that sort of things. The benefits breakdowns I always fight to have because the farther down you are, the less clicks you're going to get.
Right.
I have found that out because when I'm at the top of the email or I'm in the title of the email and I'm splashed at the front and there's no scroll space, I get a ton of more clicks and conversions that way. So there's that, and then I do a monthly roll up for the VA Podcast Network because I'm also executive producing about 5 or 6 other podcasts for the VA.
Only 5 or 6, all right.
Yeah, only 5 or 6 right now. right now. And then so what we do is we roll that up into a monthly newsletter that has all the links and stuff like that. So about once a month on that as well. Because direct email marketing, it's a precious resource that you don't want to abuse.
Right.
So if you spam, I mean, you're going to get the most conversions out of it. Still, email marketing. Email today for podcasting, for me, in my experience, is king. But you don't want to abuse it. There was a time when somebody spammed, and it wasn't my office, it was another office, spammed that email marketing. They saw that and they went for the quick shoot. They spammed all those users 27 times in one day. 27 times. Can you imagine getting 27 emails from the same person?
Right.
And at work, you're like, man, this guy needs shit. But can you imagine just being a veteran from the VA? You're getting 27 emails?
Oh, yeah.
Bro, you're going to unsubscribe real quick.
Right.
So it's a very good resource, but is a precious resource that you don't want to abuse. If that makes any sense.
So how active or how often do you take feedback from your veterans to create your next podcast? Like, is there a feedback type process as far as, hey, you know what, I'm thinking about what veterans are wanting or desiring, so we should do this?
It's the emails that I get. It's the reviews that I get. It's the emails, reviews, in person sometimes. I take all that into consideration. I try to plan around that. Especially with the benefits breakdowns, but it's hard to schedule the benefits breakdown sometimes, like the next week. So you gotta. It's a 2-week. It's a 2-week turnaround for the podcast, right? So I'm in production. It's a 3-week really. If you gotta get the interview in the can about 3 weeks ahead of time. 1 week to produce roughs for everything, and then the next week you finalize and schedule. So you take that into consideration, and then get the feedback and then plan. And hopefully you hit the mark.
Yeah.
So,
is there a sweet spot as far as like length? Should like
I've been asked that question a lot.
Yeah.
And you don't want to make them short. 8 minutes, 5 minutes. What are you doing? Honestly. But the thing is Rogan does 3-hour podcasts.
Right.
And so as long as content is king and you can reuse the content, then keep it in. I have found, I do hour-long podcasts, 90-minute podcasts. I've done 20-minute podcasts. Content's king in podcasting. If the content is good, keep it in. If it's not engaging, if someone's not learning, if your audience can't glean something from that, then take it out. And I've, like I said, 20 minutes to 90 minutes. I've done everything in between on Born in the Battle. I've seen people that try to stick to a time. I've seen people that, don't. I'm not one to constrain myself with the time limit. I'm constraining myself based on good content. But then there's people that break the rules and do wildly successful things. Like Dan's Hardcore History. You can look it up. The dude posts infrequently. He doesn't post on any sort of schedule. He'll post like 3 6-hour-long podcasts where it's like no music. It's just him talking to the mic.
Wow.
Dude is like one of the top 5 podcasts in the world. People just like his voice, like the content. What he's 6 hour long. I tried listening to one and I was like, I don't get it.
Right.
But he has a massive audience.
You're not his audience.
I am not.
Right.
I am not. Obviously not. But there is a massive appetite for that.
Yeah.
Because he's talking about some pretty engaging historical stuff. I will give him that. But he breaks all the podcasting rules. There's no rules to podcasting. Just find your formula and make sure it works. I will tell you, if you post infrequently, if you don't post, if you're an episodic podcast and you're not posting at least bi-weekly, if you're not setting up some sort of expectation for your audience, you will probably fail. Apple Podcasts will not even notify your audience if you don't post at least once every 2 weeks.
Okay. So for my public affairs, my communication strategists that are out there, they watch this and they're saying, hey, you know what? This is a great idea. I want to start a podcast, right? How do I convince my boss? How do I take this and say, hey, you know what? We need to get on board with this.
Identify your purpose. Identify your audience. Identify the reason that you need it to communicate as a communication medium. And then set up the supporting structure. So like when Tim Lawson, the previous host, was like, so what's the Tanner Isker of Born in the Battle going to look like? And I remember, because we did an interview, we did a changeover episode kind of thing. And he asked me that question. I remember, and you can look it up. I can't remember. It's like episode 135 or something. But I gave him some kind of like BS answer. I was like, I'm gonna blah bitty blah bitty blah, and my mind was like, okay, what is this thing really gonna look like? I had no clue, and then so I went back to my training that I had here at DINFOS. I said, all right, what's the mission statement, and what are the tenets that are going to build that mission statement? So my mission statement is to, inspire and educate veterans on the resources and benefits of the VA. How are we going to do that? I'm going to tell inspiring stories about transition for veterans that veterans can get inspired with. I'm going to educate the VA population. That's another audience sector I didn't even talk about. I'm going to educate the VA employees about the warriors that they serve. I'm going to get information from the VA to the veterans as quickly as possible. I'm going to promote veteran advocacy through the voices of veterans. And there's one more, and I can't remember it right off the top of my head, but if you go to blogs.va.gov, okay, and check out Born in the Battle podcast, it's right there. And so if you fit one of those 5 tenets, you're going to fit that mission statement, and we're going to have you on the podcast, and we're going to have a great discussion. If you're able to sell something like that, then I would say do a podcast. If not, if you're just like, I just want a podcast, you need to answer all those questions.
Yeah, I think that's for all social media. A lot of times, and I like the fact that you guys have those 5 tenets, because then it can pretty much determine what type of content you put up, right? Because if it doesn't meet these 5, then it doesn't go here.
Yep.
And the same thing goes with social. Hey, we've decided we're going to discuss these things on Facebook or on Instagram or Twitter, and if it doesn't fit this mode, then we're going to kind of stay away from it.
Yeah, and a lot of it is for us. We want veterans. We want voices of veterans on this podcast, and we have bent that rule a couple times with VA employees that can have information to veterans, and there's a reason for that. It fits one of the tenets: get information from the VA to the veterans as quickly as possible. We can still kind of do that, and still hit the mark. So, but yeah, you got to have like you said, it goes with any kind of content. It's not just podcasting. It's documentaries. It's features. It's video. I'm saying like 3 different types of videos because that's what I used to do. But web pages, whatever you want to do in communication, you need to have a strategic marketing plan behind it.
So, touching on that again, having a marketing plan, and you mentioned that distribution is huge, just not social, but having a blog posts and all these things. So,
they'll build off one another.
I know Anchor is a platform. I know how good it is, but you can use Anchor to broadcast to multiple channels.
Yep.
Are there any other platforms that you think is kind of good to get into?
Many.
Okay. What are your favorite?
So we started on Libsyn.
Okay.
I moved away from Libsyn because I didn't like the player. I didn't like the visual look of the player.
Okay.
It is that simple. I'm sorry, Libsyn. We moved to we wanted to go to Captivate, but they weren't a U.S. company. We're a government podcast.
Right.
There's U.S. companies. So we went to Transistor. What I liked about Transistor was a nice, big, clean player. And when you hit subscribe, you can hit subscribe on the player, and it brings open a list of all the things, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, whatever podcast app is on your phone.
Right.
So from the blog, you can literally subscribe to the podcast app of your choice. Loved that feature. Loved it. And I decided I needed to have that feature on my player. And so and it was so much cheaper than Libsyn. There's a lot of those podcast players out there. Buzzsprout, Spreaker, there's all kinds of them.
Right.
Just do the research. There's some that are better than others, some that are cheaper. There's some that, Libsyn is kind of like your big dog in that arena.
Right.
So maybe there's some kind of promotion that you get out of it or something. I don't know. Just do the research because there's plenty of, they're called podcast directories.
Okay.
Anchor's one. Anchor's the free one. That's the lowest barrier of entry. But they also have a podcast editor. That's one of the competitive advantages that they have over everybody else.
Right.
And I actually like their recorder there's a way to do it and I haven't done it yet. Because I have a Rodecaster Pro. You can connect Bluetooth phone, or you can connect it via analog auxiliary cable, and you can have a phone call in on one of your levels on your Rodecaster Pro.
Right.
Anchor has it to where if you go through the Anchor app, it sounds like a professional microphone, not just a phone call in.
Wow.
So I haven't played with it yet, but I know that they have that as an advantage in their podcast player on their phone. So there's a lot of different podcast directories out there, and they do a lot of different things.
Right.
But their main purpose is to one upload goes to everyone else. So.
Right. So when it comes to the type of podcast, of course there's audio and then there's video. What are your thoughts on what medium works the best?
It really depends, and it really depends on your marketing strategy.
Okay.
It really depends. Like we are getting into video because nowadays in podcasting, if you're not having a video podcast, you're kind of behind the curve a little bit. It's 2021, right? So, however, you got to have it. As a video producer, I'm still very picky on the quality of the video content. Like, how many times have you gone through your phone and you're going through Instagram or you're going through Twitter, and you see like two guys? It's a two shot like this, and they're talking back and forth, and you're like, okay, go, and you keep scrolling because there's no camera change, there's no production quality value to it at all. Just two people side by side talking. I can listen to that and get the same thing, you know.
Right.
So I was a proponent of I needed to figure out a way to cut cameras and have at least a three scene podcast. That was just me, you know. But because I'm one of the guys, I will keep scrolling if I see that same two shot. It doesn't do anything for me. You know, I listen to Rogan, Pat McAfee, a couple others, and Dan Patrick is a sports show on NBC Sports, but it might as well be a podcast. It is a podcast, but it's a video podcast. So all those have in common? To be successful, they all have pretty high production quality when it comes to camera shots and camera angles and camera cuts. So in order for me, I want to compete with them. I don't want to compete with the little podcast that could. I want to be one of those guys. So I'm going to figure out a way to do it. But again, is the YouTube as popular right now as, well, again, the podcast players are the ones that are the most, that I focus on the most. Even in the YouTube, I put links to get to the audio player so you can subscribe. It's all about content, or eventually where you want them to go. Do you want them to go on YouTube? Do you want them to go on the podcast player? That's going to be up to you, and your marketing strategy is going to be centered around that. I would focus more on the podcast players, less on the YouTube. Okay. That may change as we move forward, but right now it's the podcast player.
So Tanner, do you have any are there any good starting points or references that you would maybe offer the audience?
Absolutely. When I first started podcasting, again, I came from the video production world, didn't really get into podcasting, didn't know how to upload anything or anything like that. The first thing my wife did, she bought me two Marine Corps, they were Marine Corps safe books. They were about that big, right? So, and they had big words in it. They were little words but they were big font, right? So it was 100 great podcast tips from 100 great podcasters, and then how to grow and monetize your podcast with Mark Gubernetti. Everything I've told you about in this forum, I got from those two books. And again, they're Marine Corps safe. They're about that big. You know, I can read them in a couple months. You know.
I'm sure the comment I appreciate.
Yeah. It was like Message to Garcia is about that big. But no, they were both immensely huge resources in starting this podcast journey. Because again, in 2019, I knew nothing about it. Absolutely nothing.
Wow. That's good, man. To start from, you started from the bottom, right?
That's it. And somewhere near the bottom. No.
So, I have a question for you. So, you said 2019, and once again, technology and everything is moving so quickly.
Yeah.
What do you view as the future of podcasting? What does the next 2-3 years hold? What do you see coming down the line? What new trends are emerging?
Video. That's the biggest thing right now. Is people are doing lives. You've seen a lot of live stuff on Instagram. But again, I don't think the production quality is there to make it a long-term type of thing. Again, I think it's just part of the content strategy to get people to buy stuff or click stuff, Video, obviously a high production quality part of your podcast when it comes to video. I also see the Amazon Echo and the dots and all that getting ingrained into that is going to be probably the future is getting into the personal, remote players type of stuff. If you can get in there, you're pretty much at the forefront of podcasting.
Okay. So you don't foresee anything kind of like the .com bust where all these the feeders they're going to fall off and there's going to be a few good ones?
That's completely going to happen.
Yeah.
That's already happened.
Right.
You can already start seeing it. People starting podcasts and fade within 6 months because they realize that, there's work to this. Because like I said, the days of if you build it, they will come are not gonna be there. I think you need a Marine Corps or you need a Department of Defense. If you're in government, you need something with an established audience already to be able to feed into, to be able to provide information to from this medium. If you're starting from scratch with no audience, it's incredibly difficult, and you have no marketing dollars on established social media platforms like think about it now: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. they have established audiences. Man, they've squeezed that algorithm to the point where it's just a drip. And if you wanted to open that pipe back up, you're going to start paying some money, right? And we see that now. LinkedIn had a pretty open pipe. It's starting to close. You can already see it starting to close. So really, you're going to have to look at, when you're looking at marketing your podcast, either shoveling a bunch of money into those, or if you have an organic base, you're going to get 10% of that, roughly, right? That's going to be shown to them. You're going to be looking to the next social media platforms to market to that's going to have a wide open pipe. So when you talk about future, marketing on social media, you're going to be looking for those next social media platforms, and they're out there, and you just got to find out if your audience is on there or not, and if so, you should be marketing to them on there. Whether it's if your audience is there, you need to start marketing there because that pipe's wide open and they're going to get to you. And at the end of the day, you want to influence your audience, right? So find them. Find that new, I think what's the new ones now? It's the
Clubhouse is out there.
Clubhouse is the new stuff, right? But that's more of like a live. I've never even done it.
Yeah, it's like a live kind of, you jump into these rooms and the conversation's already going. So it'd be similar to somebody just logging in right now. We're at the end, and it's like, boom, you're here, and you're hoping to, I don't know how that, I feel like those conversations have to be, maybe that's your 6 hour block.
So yeah, but you need to figure out a way to make the conversion, right? Because at the end of the day, you want them to subscribe to your podcast.
Right.
So, or as club, basically your strategy is going to be around what you eventually want to take people to.
Right.
So what you say it's Clubhouse, say it's Google Plus, right?
Let's make it come back.
Whatever that new one is, and it has an open pipe, you need to figure out how to convert that audience to the place you want them to go. Whether that be an established platform or one of these podcasts or your podcast, sub them on your favorite podcast player. But yeah, that's the future. Is really, the past is really all these social media platforms that have the drip. The future is looking to all these social, and you got to be ahead of the game. You just got to be ahead of the game and build strategy around those. So, hope did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
All right.
Well, Tanner, tell us how, we've talked a lot about the podcast.
Yeah.
Tell us where to find the podcast. How do we find you? How do people connect with you? Are you on LinkedIn? Are you on?
I am on LinkedIn. You can find me personally on LinkedIn. I hate promoting myself because I'm not in the business of promoting myself. We're in the government. But if you want to talk to me directly, that's the best place to do it, is my LinkedIn. DEPT Vet Affairs, whether it be on Twitter or Instagram, that's where you'll get a lot of the promotion. Now we're in the video. Now we're putting video clips on there. We're on Department of Veterans Affairs on YouTube. To subscribe to the podcast, you can go to your podcast app of choice and find it. Born the Battle, born with an E, born because it's like the Gettysburg Address. Born those who have borne the battle, to take care of those who have borne the battle and their widows and the orphans. Kind of lifted from that. That's where the title came from. So it's born the battle, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Name your podcast player, you'll find it. We're even on the Echoes and Dots and Amazon Music and all that stuff now. So you can find it. Except I don't think we're on Pandora. They're kind of a little wonky, but everybody else plays nice, and I upload it once and it goes everywhere. So you can exit Born the Battle. You can find me personally on LinkedIn. Ask me, and then you can also email the podcast at podcast@va.gov.
Awesome. Well, hey, man, appreciate your time, brother. It was nice catching up with you, man. Glad you could come and join us. Glad you could entertain the audience a little bit.
I hope I did.
Yeah.
It's like coming home, man.
I know, right?
Coming to DMA, coming to DINFOS, this was good. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, man, no problem. If you guys have any questions and follow-up questions, be sure to email us at socialmedia@dinfos.edu. And
I'll be there for like a half hour afterwards?
Yeah, we're going to jump on the Facebook page here in a bit and probably have some conversation as well. So
kind of like an AMA type of thing, right?
Something like that.
Okay.
We should look into the whole Reddit thing, but it's
another discussion.
Yeah, that's next year's forum. Again, guys, thanks for joining us, and that's it.